Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And so I want to, like, we're talking about covers, so I'll be happy to talk about all the things that I can think about to talk about, but I also want to make sure I discuss the things that are interesting to you. So if any of you have any questions about the covers or even about anything else, feel welcome to throw out the questions as well, and we can talk about them. So often when I'm asked to do a cover, a lot of people when they're doing covers, they kind of think about, just what's on in the middle of the cover. But I'm usually thinking that the job of the cover is really to make somebody see it. And if they're seeing it in person in the store, you want to make them walk up to it and pick it up. Or if they're seeing it online, you want to make them stop and click on it. So I'm not thinking just what's inside, but I'm thinking how it looks, like on the shelf, with 100 other books beside it, or how it looks online with a lot of other images. And so I want to do something that sets it apart from the other things that are here. Filling the cover completely with maybe a lot of different characters and a lot of things happening, which is fine, but a lot of the covers have a similar composition. So sometimes from a distance, when the reader sees them on the shelf inside the comic store, a lot of them kind of blend together in a way. So I try to choose a cover that has like some really strong shapes so that you can see it from a distance if you're looking at it in the store, or if you're seeing it like, on your phone or on your laptop and it's very small, I want the shapes to still be strong enough to grab your attention and make you want to click on it. I do that. Like on the Superman, I'm using this very bold outline shape, and the rest is white, so that when it's next to a lot of other covers that have a lot of different colors on it and a lot of different characters, this is going to kind of have a frame that sets it apart from all the things that are next to it. And hopefully it's going to make you want to come closer, and then when you come closer, then you're going to see like what's inside the shape. In this Daredevil cover, I might leave I have the main central figure in the center, but I might leave like one of the sides, kind of like what I call a buffer zone. Like maybe the side has less detail or less color, or it's all white. So it's going to stand out from what's next to it.
Y en este caso, en esta portada de Daredevil, pueden ver que claramente el personaje está al centro, pero se genera la llamatividad, en este caso con lo que David llama una zona más floja, una zona con menos detalle, lo cual resalta la vista y hace que te centres en lo demás, pero a la vez saca un poco de la expectativa de decir como, esto está lleno, tengo que verificar todo para entender la representación, y eso te atrapa en un primer instante.
So, who remembers this image? Have you seen this one before? So it kind of works a similar way. I worked on the book Jessica Jones, and then when they made a Netflix TV show about it, like the images on Netflix that you have, like that are small that you want to click on, it's kind of like the cover. And so you want it to I try to put a certain amount of detail in here, and maybe the character is making eye contact with the viewer, but on the edges here, I kind of want it to fade out a little bit so it stands apart from what's next to it when you're flipping through on the Netflix. So I should also say, the cover kind of does something for the book in a way that like the opening titles might do for a TV show or a film. Aside from grabbing your attention and making you want to pick it up, it's kind of setting the psychological tone for like what kind of headspace the reader should be in, like for reading the book. And it's kind of a similar way, like when making opening titles. I worked on the opening titles to the Jessica Jones Netflix series, and so we wanted to kind of get you into kind of the feeling of what you're going to watch, and sort of preparing your headspace for it. And the cover works that way to a certain degree, and so I kind of think of it somewhat comparable to how opening titles works, or a movie poster works for a film or a movie or a TV show. So I'll also add that we got nominated for an Emmy for the opening titles on Jessica Jones. So I got to go to the Emmys, which we were doing this comic like 20 years ago. I never would have thought I'd be going to the Emmys, for that. So I'll also say that, some main titles come at the beginning, but sometimes with the film, the main titles come at the end. And so, has anyone seen the film Captain America: The Winter Soldier? So I worked on the main titles in that film, but those are at the very end. So it's kind of a different feeling. Whereas they're preparing for people and how to feel what their headspace should be for the film. You're kind of the punctuation mark for it, and you kind of want to crystallize the feeling that they have when they're walking out of the feeling. About covers, but if anyone has questions also about like the Winter Soldier film titles or Jessica Jones TV show or opening titles or anything else, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I'll pause and then you can ask any questions and we can discuss that way too. So this was for a cover for Daredevil End of Days. Brian Bendis and myself wrote it, and then the interior art was done by Klaus Janson and Bill Sienkiewicz. And those guys were artists that were working on Daredevil, like when Bendis and I were young and we were first reading Daredevil. So it was really wonderful to write a story that we were able to collaborate with our heroes that we kind of learned from. So for this one, because it takes place in the snow, it was a great opportunity for me to let a lot of the white, a lot of the negative space. I feel like you can use negative space a certain amount of way to catch the attention of the viewer to a certain degree. So there's quite a bit of white here because it's the snow, so I just left that part blank. And it's also, in a way, kind of an homage to an earlier Daredevil cover from the early 80s that Frank Miller and Klaus Janson did, where Daredevil is at the grave of Elektra. So I thought, for this particular story, it made sense to kind of reverse that idea. This one is another example of kind of using negative space. This was a cover for Neil Gaiman's American Gods collection. And so, in this case, I used watercolor here, but I just left all of this part, white. And I felt like that would be a really bold shape that would catch people's attention from a distance. So, those are some of the ways that, some of the things I kind of think about, like when I'm thinking about doing the cover. And so, if you're ever composing a cover, it's just something to think about because so many people just think only what it looks like on its own, but so many people are going to see it in a room full of like 200 other books on the shelf next to it. So it's, part of the job of that cover is just to really like grab your attention and, make someone want to pick it up. One of the other things I kind of do is I kind of try to use eye contact sometimes. Like Faces on magazines use this a lot, where like you're walking by and the subject of the magazine cover is like their eyes are looking directly at you. So that works pretty good too. Also, these are all like original art I have that I'll have at my table back there. And after we talk here, any of you are also welcome to come to my table and look through any of the art or the prints. And they also told me that if anyone wants to take photos, we have to go back there at my table afterwards. So you're all welcome to stop by after this. But in the meantime, if any of you have any other questions before I continue, feel welcome to say anything. No, that's a good point about how I often try to make the cover kind of crystallize a feeling of what's inside the story. And so I might not want to show like exactly what happens, I might not necessarily want to do a spoiler for the story, but I might want to give like a certain kind of feeling for what it's going to be like. And so I may make a few reference points of some things that occur inside the story, but I don't want to be too precise about it because I still want, them to have the magic of reading the book and finding out those details. But sometimes I like to sort of suggest something. For me, I think a really important aspect of a quality to have on the cover is a sense of mystery. So I want the cover to maybe ask a certain kind of question or make them curious about some kind of mystery inside the book. But I don't want to solve the mystery on the cover because I want to leave that to the reader to kind of figure out, when they're reading the book. But I do try to make a reference to something in it. Like if I have the opportunity, I'll read the story first and kind of let it percolate in my head and kind of think about like what's the right kind of feeling to suggest what the right mystery of the story is. Yeah, about choosing the story, about choosing the colors for the story. Sometimes it's very specific to the story. Like when I was doing the colors to the covers for Jessica Jones for the original series called Alias with Brian Bendis, he would talk to me beforehand, and one of the main characters, now we know him as Kilgrave from the TV show, but back then they called him the Purple Man. And so he said, there's going to be a storyline of the Purple Man, so I want all of those colors to be, mostly purple, or to use purple to a large degree. So that was a sense, a situation where there was a very definitive like look and feel for the cover that was going to suggest something, that occurs in the story. Even before the Purple Man was introduced, the covers are still going to have purple to them, or they're going to have Jessica kind of drowning in purple, or saturated, with a lot of different purple tones. Or one time there was Jessica walking on the street, and there's a building behind her, and everything is kind of in blues, but there's like a light on in the window of the building, and just that light is purple. So there was like in that case there was very specific things to think about how to use the color purple in an interesting way. Approach when we worked on the opening titles to the Jessica Jones series. There was like even before you really know what it's about, there's like a lot of purple in the opening titles too. But another example of like a totally different approach to color is when we did the main titles for the Captain America Winter Soldier film titles. And in that, like everything is just a stark black and white, like a really bold contrast, like just bold shapes, black shapes, white shapes, and occasionally just a touch of red, like every now and then like a red star, for the Winter Soldier or something. But that was because that film, has everyone seen the film, the Winter Soldier film? It's my favorite Marvel film actually, and also it's my favorite main titles. But it kind of reminds me of almost like a 70s style espionage film. And we kind of wanted to use like really bold shapes. There's a designer named Saul Bass who did like a lot of the opening titles for Stanley Kubrick's films or Alfred Hitchcock or some for Scorsese. And he often used like just some really big, bold black shapes. And I guess to a certain degree, like maybe the James Bond films of the 60s or 70s had some really bold shape and designs. But also the artist Steranko, Jim Steranko, he did art for Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He also worked at Captain America in the 60s. And when he did Nick Fury, he had like some really interesting bold black and white designs. And so that was also an influence, an inspiration with doing those. But we felt like, we could use any kind of colors or textures we want, but in that case we felt like a certain kind of minimalism, and just really stark black and white shapes were the right feel for the end of the film.
Mi pregunta es, quisiera saber, ¿cómo logra decorar la figura principal de la portada con acuarela sin manchar la silueta o el personaje?
So this might be a good, I don't know how clear you can see it. This might be a good example. What I wanted to do with this character is I wanted to have sort of like a highlight around him, kind of like a rim light that sets the character apart from the background. And so I could have like a lot of dynamic colors in the background, but white, having pure white on a cover, it's kind of like a really strong, bold cover, a bold color. So you sometimes want to use it, somewhat sparingly. So there's not like much white in the middle of him, but I like just having that little white outline will create like a really striking image for it. And so he was asking about how do you not have the background colors, bleed over to it. I drew this in pencil first, so I had an idea where it was going to go. But I don't use masking or anything like that. I had tried that many years ago when I was starting. Some people, they say masking, they put like a tape or something so you can paint on top of it. But my experience was when I would try to take the tape off, it would sometimes rip the paper or the water would bleed under it anyway. So I don't use any masking. I just use like a brush. I'm dipping it in watercolor and I just run it along there. I just paint around, paint around the image that way. And so in this case, I probably painted the figure first, and then left a certain amount of, I just decided to do a certain amount of white and just painted around it. So it was just a matter of just hand painting it, directly, and just trying to be, somewhat careful. But I didn't want to be, too careful with it. I like it to look very organic, to a degree. I don't want it to look too overly technical. But yeah, I just dive in and paint it like that. Yeah. So for the opening titles for Jessica Jones, it was the only Marvel show to got nominated for two Emmys. One was for the music on the opening titles, and one was for the artwork on the opening titles. And the music did win the Emmy, but I was nominated for it. But I think the opening titles that won instead were The Man in the High Castle won. But obviously I'm still happy to be nominated for it. And we got to go to the Emmys, but also we got to go to like all the Emmys parties, And so you got to, like, we were at the Netflix party, and just like every actor from every show at Netflix is just walking around at the party. So we got to meet like a lot of other people. And also the showrunner for Jessica Jones, her name is Melissa Rosenberg. I'd never met her before, and I was at the Netflix party, and I saw her with Michael Coulter, the one who plays Luke Cage. And so I walked up and introduced myself and started speaking to them. And she immediately said, "Oh, David, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm writing the script for season 2 of Jessica Jones, and I just wrote your name in the script. There's going to be an artist, and I want you to do the artwork for it." So it was like really nice to meet her in person there and have her say that and like lock in that job for the next season too. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here too. Yeah, this is my third time to Roll Comic Con. It's really great to be back here. Basically. Thank you. So when I started with comics, I just started as a writer. And I wasn't trying to draw the comics. I was like looking for artists to draw them. I worked in a series called Kabuki for a long time, and I had written it, and I was trying to find the right artist for it. And eventually I kind of tricked myself into doing the art for it. And so, because I started as a writer, I kind of asked the same questions artistically that I ask about the writing when I'm writing a story. Like, if you're writing a story, even if you know what happens in the story, you'll ask yourself, what's the most powerful way to tell the story? Even if you know what the chronological order is, maybe it's better to do it in a different order, or is it better to tell the story in first person or third person, or from different points of views? And so when I'm doing the art for those parts of the scenes, I like to ask the same kind of question, like, what kind of style should this scene be? What kind of color should it use? Should it use different medium? Should this story just be in black and white, or should this story be in collage or mixed media or painted? And maybe like one scene is one way and the next scene is a completely different kind of art style to contrast it. So when I was working on Kabuki, I did a lot of experimentation, a lot of different kind of media. Both as a writer but also as an artist, and also using a lot of different art approaches. So I'll tell you more, but maybe I'll let you catch up to that. So, from my work on Kabuki, that's what got me the offer to start writing Daredevil. So if people don't know this, I started at Marvel as a writer. My very first work was writing Daredevil. Joe Quesada was the artist on it. Like, it was back in, I think I got the job offer in '98, and I wrote it then, and I think it came out in 1999. And so I really like, writing to the strengths of what I perceive the artist's strengths would be. And so when I'm doing artwork also, I'll kind of write to my own strengths, or write to what I think is going to be an interesting challenge for me to do artistically. But I developed several different art approaches, from pencil drawings to ink drawings to sort of like bold black and white shapes to a lot of collage. But often when people ask me to do covers, sometimes when I use some of the other approaches that aren't watercolor, they ask me to do the watercolor. So a lot of people, I think the watercolor covers stick in their mind more than my other things do. For instance, when I was asked to do all the covers for Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club book, I was trying to develop a really interesting, a different new look and style for it. So I had turned in one set of covers that were all like very graphic, very shape oriented, and the editor said that wasn't quite right. And so I did another style that had like a lot of details and textures and collage on it. And he said that wasn't quite what he had in mind. So I was like, well, let me know, was there anything you had in mind? And he just sent me back like a lot of watercolor covers that I had done. So I was like, oh, well, yeah, well, I can do that too. So I did that. So most of my covers are watercolor because most people ask for that. But I really enjoyed, for instance, the Captain America Winter Soldier because I really got to use the design approach. My BFA, my degree is in graphic design. So I also like, having very design-oriented approach as well. But, and for fun, like what I do for myself is I like, if it's not a project I'm asked to do, probably at least once a week, I try to do quick drawings from life. And I do like quick drawings directly in ink with an ink pen or an ink brush of like figures. Like I feel like I can learn a lot from that I can apply in my other work. But it's nice to do a kind of work that it doesn't have any sense of expectation, so it's not anything required for any job. So you can experiment with it a lot, and then I can learn from that and kind of apply like little epiphanies or little interesting things that I'll learn from that into my. I'll do like a little quick ink doodle, like while I was talking. I'll do a little drawing of you.
Del mismo modo igual, vaya, cuando no está haciendo como algo que es de trabajo, cuando está haciendo algo que es más personal, suele tomar siluetas del mundo real, ¿no? Ya sea figuras o algún retrato en el parque o algo parecido. Esto ayuda mucho porque no estás teniendo la expectativa y la presión de que esto es para un trabajo, tiene que ser llamativo, puedes experimentar fuera de esa área. No únicamente como retomando esta idea de que pues, sí hace acuarela, pero también hace mucho trabajo a lápiz, entonces tiene que estar realizando como distintos días, distintas áreas, pero lo que le gusta y de manera personal no está esta presión encima, trata de hacerlo diario y pues eso es lo que le tenía que decir yo mientras él hace un sketch rápido de este lado. No tengo mucho más que decir, aunque yo no lo por la clase, así que disfruten la vista, por favor.
Yeah, so sometimes just like experimenting with a brush or a pen, I can learn a lot. And sometimes I'm painting like watercolor, but sometimes I'll sort of draw with the watercolor in the same way I would with as if it was ink.
Muchas veces igual es muy interesante el poder tener un bolígrafo, un lápiz o un pincel para poder experimentar, es algo que es muy entretenido. Más que nada también lo hago con acuarelas directamente, es algo que te ayuda mucho a mejorar tu manera ilustrativa y poder tener un buen incremento de tus habilidades. La práctica es el maestro.
And when I'm just drawing like really quickly like that directly in ink, I like to feel very spontaneous, and I want it to have a certain like kind of life to it, like a certain freedom and an openness and a quickness.
Del mismo modo, igual cuando estoy pintando en acuarelas, me gusta sentir que estoy haciendo cierta libertad, que estoy haciéndolo de una manera que me siento vivo, me gusta lo que estoy haciendo y trato de ver que eso se vea reflejado en mi trabajo.
And that's important because sometimes when I am painting covers, like in watercolor, if I'm painting it, I might have somebody model for me and I might take some photos of them. But I don't want it to look too much. You don't want it to look too technical or too realistic or too much like the photo. So it's really kind of important to have it feel like it has a certain like freshness to it as well, and a kind of certain spontaneity to it as well.
Del mismo modo, igual, pues, vaya, cuando suelo utilizar un modelo que esté en persona o alguna fotografía, pero no me gusta ser muy técnico, tiene que ver como esta parte en la que tiene que ser en cierta forma, esta distinción del arte, esta parte en la que el está haciendo su trabajo, tiene cierto estilo, un poco alejado de la realidad.
And also, like, you can kind of learn a lot about lighting with just doing like really quick ink drawings as well. Because really, like whenever you're looking at something and you're drawing it, it's really there's a lot of information from the reality. And the question is really like how much information to leave out. You're trying to be specific about. You don't want to capture all the information. You only want the information that's important for that particular drawing or what you're trying to convey. So it's really a great exercise in omitting information and seeing reducing it down to the most elemental useful part of it. and just drawing quickly from life, like directly in ink, it forces me to do that without thinking about it too much, or without fussing over it too much.
Del mismo modo, cuando estás viendo algo de la realidad, hay una parte que es que tienes luces, ya que cuando estás viendo la realidad, toda esta información que está frente a ti, tienes que ser muy selectivo, porque es un momento únicamente que vas a agarrar y vas a transportar a tus manos, tus pinceles. Entonces tienes que decir, qué es lo que voy a retomar y qué voy a dejar afuera para que todo esté en orden y para que todo siga siendo esa esencia de lo que estoy haciendo yo.
So like I'm doing like a quick brushing drawing of that character I did most of my work in comics of Kabuki. And so like when I'm thinking about lighting, I don't necessarily want it to be symmetrical. I think the lighting is over here, so I'll have like a little bit of shadow on this nostril, and a little bit of highlight on the eye. And when I do the lips here, I might leave this side of the lip might be a little darker, but if the lighting is over here, I'll leave that side of the lip a little more open.
Del mismo modo, ahorita está haciendo un sketch rápido de lo que solía ser el título de Kabuki. En este caso, retomando lo de la iluminación, donde está la nariz puede ver que el sombreado está hacia allá, entonces la iluminación está viniendo desde esa perspectiva. Se puede ver igualmente en el ojo izquierdo, de cómo este se ve reflejado en los labios, igualmente al ser sombreado más fuerte de la parte que está como al costado inferior.
And if you're using a brush, you can get like the little tip of it for these little parts, but you can get something wider, more expressive as well.
Cuando estás utilizando pinceles puedes utilizar esta clase de técnicas que no son necesariamente simétricas para que haya un poquito más de llamatividad en la composición.
But I like drawing directly in ink like that as well. And if I'm using a pencil, I'll do it a different way. I like kind of taking advantage of like the unique properties that like each medium has. So if I'm doing watercolor, I'll be thinking about it in a different way than I am if I'm doing ink or collage or boulder shapes.
Del mismo modo, me gusta mucho dibujar en tintas y qué es lo que se puede expresar con eso. Claramente cada una de las técnicas y estilos es diferente, entonces tienes que pensar qué es lo que se hace cuando estás ya sea con acuarelas, con tinta directamente, ya sea dibujando a lápiz o con cualquier otra técnica, tiene que verse reflejado no como un estilo completo, sino adaptado a ese mismo tipo de arte.
So sometimes I use these pens, they're called parallel pens, and they have they can be really thin, but they can be a little thicker here too. So if I'm drawing directly with a pen like that, you've got like thin line and that thick line.
La pluma como la que está dibujando en este momento es lo que se llama pluma paralela, es una línea que tiene mucho cuidado, tienes que ser muy precavido ya que la línea que se dibuja puede ser muy delgada o muy gruesa, dependiendo de cómo se sostenga, entonces refleja igual esta idea de las crestas fuertes o duras que decía en un principio, o otros aspectos acerca de cómo se mantiene el trazo.
But here, it's like a lot more about the line, than about like the marks or shapes, like of the brush.
En este sentido es mucho más importante que tengas más en cuenta acerca de lo que es la silueta, más que los bordes como lo sería el pincel.
So I carry these around too to do, sometimes like I'm walking around. I really like Mexico City because there's so many sculptures, and I like walk around and do like quick drawings of sculptures, like with a pen like this. Yeah. So yeah, it was asking like who are my influences, who's my inspiration, who formed me as an artist, and at different stages in your life, you're kind of inspired from different people. When I was very young, and I found a Daredevil comic when I was like 9 years old, and it was like a Frank Miller, Klaus Janson comic. So I liked the art and the story, but I also have a very fond of those artists in that book because it's also when I started to realize that the artists were putting a lot of intelligence behind the storytelling of it. And so I kind of became aware of storytelling for the first time with those Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, Daredevil books. And so I like the art fine, but I also like what I was learning about how they were using shadows and lighting and the panel size, the shapes of the panels to tell the story. So, for a long time, that was kind of my favorite kind of art. And then, I would discover somebody else and try to learn from that. And then, there's kind of like no off switch to to just constantly, going through life and being inspired and learning from things. But I would also say this: my mother was a first grade teacher, and so I would always see her making things as lessons to teach the students. So, she had, like the same watercolors that she had, or the same kind I used. They're like, watercolors for first graders, basically. So I was used to using that, and I would see her like cutting things up and putting things together for the students to learn like their seasons or their numbers, things like this, their colors. And so I understood art and making something as a tool for communication and expression and education. And so I think that was kind of ingrained in me when I was very young, watching my mother make things as a tool of teaching, or as kind of like a storytelling tool. So that was probably very inspiring to me at a very formative age.
Pues vaya, es una pregunta que es muy atenta, ya que tenemos estas etapas de crecimiento y en qué nos inspiramos. Algo que me toma David mucho es la etapa de Frank Miller y David Flush en Daredevil. Yo pensaba mucho en estas cuestiones de iluminación, que jugaban ahí, que era lo que se movía entre las siluetas, y la dinámica de las viñetas. Era algo que trataba de aprender mucho, pero vaya, él no se quedó únicamente ahí, sino que siguió avanzando y como tenía otra inspiración nueva, trataba de aprender más de ahí y sacar inspiración posible para poder tomar con su trabajo. Aunque algo más importante aún es que su mamá era profesora de primaria y era algo que veía mucho él, como en casa su mamá trataba de hacer estos ejercicios para sus alumnos y de ese tipo de acuarelas que ellos son acuarelas para niños de primer año. Pero la diferencia es que ahí era algo que tenía que ser enfocado como para enseñar, para era cortar aquí, pegar allá, pintar por aquí para que fuera entendible y disfrutable. Y creo que esa es una lección que se quedó muy impuesta dentro de él, que le absorbió de manera intrínseca desde su casa.
I add one thing to that. There was this, my brother and I were around the same age, and we were very energetic young kids. So my mother she would constantly tell us to, give us some paper or pencil or something just for us to kind of focus and not get in trouble. And one thing this idea she gave us was, one of us would lay down on a big sheet of paper, and the other one would draw the outline around the figure. And then you have the shape of you at your young kid age. But then the idea was, she said, inside it you can draw yourself however you want to be. So you could draw yourself inside as an astronaut or an alien or Zorro or anything. And so we would entertain ourselves by outlining each other and then drawing ourselves as Spock or a Star Wars character or something. And I thought it was a really formative educational experience for a kid, because not only are you occupying yourself and learning to make something, but you're also kind of thinking that that outline is kind of the shape that you're born into. There's certain things that we're born into that we can't change, but what you fill the shape in is you're based on your imagination. And so there's a certain amount that we can't change with what our life is, the family we're born into, a variety of things like that. But your imagination really opens you up to how much you can change about yourself, or decide about yourself, or decide what you're going to be. So a lot of it was like that. We're sort of we're going to decide what we're going to be and draw ourselves inside it. Yeah, so I think a lot of things like that, when I was a little kid, probably shaped my imagination and exercised it in a certain way. It made me feel like there's a lot of things that that you can do, that you can fill inside that outline. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming here. Really appreciate it.